Greetings to everyone tuning in to my channel. Today's story is: before the wedding, my future mother-in-law demanded 70% of my salary or she'd call it off. I calmly presented three conditions that left her pale, speechless, and unsteady on her feet. It was early autumn in Boston. A crisp breeze rustled through the streets. The leaves on the maple trees were just beginning to turn a fiery gold, and the faint, sweet scent of roasting nuts from a street vendor's cart serve as a gentle reminder that some things, which seem as soft and placid as a morning mist, can vanish the moment the sun burns too brightly. My name is Clara Hayes, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a project manager for a multinational tech firm here in Boston. The downside of my job is that I've grown accustomed to pressure, to a world where everything must be explicit. Timelines must be clear, responsibilities defined, and boundaries, most of all, must be sharp. Some people call me rigid, saying a woman should be a little softer for the sake of a peaceful home. But I've always believed that the old adage "respect your elders" is a principle for people to treat each other with decency, not a license for someone to use the guise of tradition to force another person to bow their head. My family lives in a classic brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, not far from my old high school. My father, Mr. Hayes, is a retired history teacher. My mother, Mrs. Hayes, taught English. They lived a structured, dignified life. We were never wealthy, but our home was always immaculate and orderly. My dad often said, "You can be poor in money, but never be poor in integrity." My mother was the softer one. She'd always remind me, kindness costs nothing, Clara. Choose your words to build bridges, not walls. Thanks to them, I grew up with a strong sense of discipline, but not without warmth. I learned to respect others, but also to protect myself. There's a difference between being respectful and being a doormat. I've been dating Leo Vance for 2 years. He was a kind, quiet software developer, the type of man who, once in love, shows it more through actions than words. I remember our first meeting at a friend's gathering. A sudden downpour had started, and I'd forgotten my umbrella. Without saying much, he simply stepped to my side, angling his large umbrella to shield me as I navigated a large puddle. I thought to myself then, this is a decent man. Decency isn't always in grand pronouncements, but in small, consistent acts of kindness. Our love wasn't the picture-perfect kind you see plastered all over social media with heart emojis. We were busy. We mostly saw each other in the evenings or on weekends. I loved ramen, he loved brisket tacos. On lazy days, we'd grab a slice from the corner pizza place, sitting on a bench and talking about work as the steam rose from the box. I used to believe that as long as two people were on the same page, everything else would fall into place. That was until one evening, exactly 1 week before our planned engagement dinner. I was just finishing up a project proposal when a text from Leo came through. "My family has booked a table at a nice place in the North End for our engagement dinner this weekend. They'd love to have your parents join." I smiled. We'd been discussing it for ages, just waiting for our families to coordinate. I called him back immediately. His voice sounded a little strained. "Is there anything you need to prepare? I was thinking I could pick you up tomorrow, and we could buy a little something for my parents." I laughed. "Anything is fine, as long as it's thoughtful. My parents are simple people. The most important thing is that everyone has a good time." Leo hesitated for a moment, then his voice dropped, as if he didn't want to be overheard. "Hey, when you talk to my mom, just be gentle, okay? She can be a little difficult." I paused. Difficult was a word Leo used often when referring to his mother. I asked him directly, "What kind of difficult? Is there something I should know beforehand?" There was a beat of silence on his end, followed by a forced laugh. No, nothing like that. My mom just worries a lot." "Don't worry. I'll handle it." I hung up, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The phrase "I'll handle it" can be a shield that makes you feel protected, but sometimes it's just a curtain hiding things that should have been brought into the light from the very beginning. My mother saw me staring into space and asked, "What's wrong, dear?" I gave her the short version. She set down her teacup, her voice low. "You need to pay close attention to his family, Clara. Marriage is for a lifetime. Don't let love blind you." My father, walking out of his study, overheard us. He said only one thing: my daughter was not raised to be bullied by anyone. I knew my parents were worried, but I didn't want to turn a potential issue into a full-blown fear. I just told myself one thing: if anything infringes on my dignity or the respect I am owed, I will not look the other way. The saying, turn the other cheek, has its place. But you turn it for an honest mistake, not for a deliberate transgression. The next day, Leo and I went to buy gifts. I chose a beautiful bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet and a box of artisanal chocolates from a local shop, a classic Boston gesture that was tasteful without being ostentatious. Leo added a large basket of imported fruit to make a good impression. I smiled. As long as this doesn't turn into a contest of which family is fancier. He laughed along, but his eyes still held a hint of avoidance. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, and a woman's measured, articulate voice came through the line. Is this Clara Hayes? Yes, it is. This is Eleanor Vance, Leo's mother. I immediately sat up straighter. Oh, hello, Mrs. Vance. It's nice to finally speak with you. She acknowledged my greeting with a curt then got straight to the point. For the dinner on Sunday, please dress simply. A young woman about to be married should prioritize modesty and good taste. I answered politely, of course. I prefer a classic style anyway. Eleanor paused for a beat before her next question, which was phrased as polite interest but felt like a probe. You're a project manager, I hear. The salary must be quite good. I was taken aback. In our culture, asking someone their salary directly, especially in a first conversation, is a major social faux pas. Still, I kept my voice calm. I have a stable career. Yes, it's enough to support myself comfortably. A faint, dry laugh came through the phone. Yes, stability is good. A woman who earns money must also know how to hold on to it. If she doesn't, she'll face hardship later on. I didn't rush to reply. I let her words hang in the air, listening to each one like the ticking of a clock in my head. The call ended quickly. She simply added, we'll talk more this weekend, and hung up. I stared at the dark screen of my phone and felt a shadow pass over my own heart. It was a short call, but it was enough for me to understand that this engagement dinner wouldn't just be a happy meeting of two families. It would be an examination, and the one writing the test wasn't Leo. It was his mother. Leo was at his apartment washing dishes. When I told him about the call, he just said, my mom's like that. Don't take it to heart. I looked at him and asked bluntly, do you know what she plans to talk about? He froze, the water running over his hands. The soap bubbles swirled down the drain. He answered in a near whisper, I'm not sure. But don't worry. I'm here for you. I suddenly let out a laugh, but it was bitter. Asterisk here for me. Asterisk. Where was here? By my side? Or standing behind his mother? That night, back in my room, I lay listening to the wind whistling through the old window frame. Early autumn in Boston was usually so gentle, but to me, it felt like the calm surface of a lake concealing a dangerous undertow. I remembered my father's words times. My daughter was not raised to be bullied by anyone times, and I made a promise to myself. I would walk into that engagement dinner with all the respect and courtesy I could muster. But I would also walk in with a boundary as clear as a line drawn on a map. Anyone who crossed it, no matter who they were, would find that I would not retreat. Because when people love each other, they find a way to make things work. But when someone intentionally tries to twist a perfect circle into a misshapen mess, it can never be round again. And a life as a daughter-in-law that begins with that kind of distortion is a life I would rather not begin at all. The restaurant was located on a familiar street in the North End, not a gaudy, gold-plated establishment, but a tastefully decorated place, the kind of spot that was respectable without being pretentious. It was a Sunday afternoon in late September. The air was dry, the sun cast a honey-colored glow on the sidewalks, and the breeze was just cool enough to be pleasant. I arrived with my parents, carrying the bottle of Cabernet and the box of artisanal chocolates, both carefully wrapped. My mother had also brought a jar of her homemade jam, remarking that something homemade is clean and comes from the heart. I wore a simple, knee-length dress in a soft beige color. It wasn't tight or flashy. Remembering Mrs. Vance's advice, I had chosen a modest and tasteful style. But honestly, I wasn't dressing to please anyone else. I was dressing to feel comfortable and confident in my own skin. I've always believed that the way people see you isn't determined by your dress, but by the preconceived notions already in their hearts. My father walked in first, his shoulders back, his shoes polished to a shine. My mother walked beside him, her expression a little tense with worry, but she kept a smile on her face. I looked at my parents and silently reminded myself that today, I wasn't just meeting my future in-laws. I was carrying my family's dignity with me. The private room was on the second floor. When the waiter opened the door, I saw that Leo's family was already seated. Mr. Vance, a thin man, sat on the far side, his hands resting neatly on the table. Mrs. Vance Eleanor sat facing the door, as if the position was designed for her to observe who entered first and who followed. Leo sat beside his mother, leaving the seat next to his father empty. Eleanor stood up, her smile not exactly cold, but certainly lacking warmth. She greeted my parents with a formal tone. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, you've arrived. Please, have a seat. My mother smiled back. Yes, we came a bit early to be proper. My father nodded and shook Mr. Vance's hand. A pleasure to meet you. Mr. Vance quickly stood to return the handshake, his voice gentle. Yes, a pleasure. Please, sit. The gentleness in his voice was that of a man who disliked conflict. A brief glance was enough to see he was a shadow next to his wife. I didn't jump to conclusions, but I made a mental note. Leo stood and pulled out a chair for me. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a flicker of anxiety. I gave him a slight nod, a silent encouragement. In my heart, there was still a sliver of hope. Whatever his mother was like, at least he knew how to be a gentleman. When the waiter brought the menus, Eleanor took one immediately. Without consulting anyone, she began ordering, as if she were running a board meeting. We'll have the burrata to start, the grilled calamari, an arugula salad, the chicken piccata, and the braised short rib, and a side of roasted vegetables. She then turned to my parents, not so much asking as informing them. I trust that's agreeable? My mother replied softly, yes, whatever is fine, as long as it suits everyone's tastes. My father just nodded. I noticed that while ordering, Eleanor hadn't asked me what I liked, nor had she asked Leo. She ordered according to her own preferences. That small act of choosing, of taking control, spoke volumes about her habit of being in charge. I was reminded of the saying, you can tell the character of a family by how they share a meal. In some families, a meal is a time for sharing. In others, it's a battleground where power is asserted through every decision. Eleanor turned to me, beginning her inspection with a seemingly innocent question. Clara, a project manager, must be very busy, I imagine? I answered politely. Yes, it can be demanding, but I'm used to it. Being used to it is good, she said, taking a sip of water. Young women today are so good at earning money, but they often live with such a strong sense of self. I heard that phrase, sense of self, and it felt like a needle lightly pricking my skin. I smiled and said nothing. My father looked directly at her, but remained silent. My mother placed her hand on her water glass, her fingers tightening slightly. Eleanor continued. I worked in the public sector my whole life. I've seen it all. Some girls, once they make their own money, start looking down on their elders, on their husband's family. But every family needs order. You understand that, don't you? I replied respectfully, yes, I understand. I believe order comes from mutual respect. Eleanor looked at me, her eyes weighing my answer as if it were on a scale. Then she gave a small, dry smile. That's a good way to put it. Asterisk. That's a good way to put it. Times implied that any other way would be unacceptable. I was beginning to see her rules of the game clearly, but I remained calm. I didn't want to put my parents in an awkward position. An engagement dinner, after all, is a time for two families to assess each other's character. If I lost my temper now, they would have an excuse to call my family disrespectful. I wouldn't give them that excuse. The food arrived, the chicken fragrant with lemon, the calamari golden and crisp, the short rib tender and hot. Normally, I love to eat, but today, eating felt like a duty. I served my mother, while observing the table. Leo said almost nothing, only occasionally laughing along with his mother or giving a short answer when my parents asked about his work. I asked him, do you have a new project? He glanced at me, then at his mother, and answered quickly, yeah, it's nothing special. I could see that every time he was about to say more, his eyes would dart towards Eleanor, as if a bell were ringing in his head, warning him that saying too much was a mistake. Mr. Vance, on the other hand, tried to keep the atmosphere light. He asked my father about his teaching days and my mother about our old neighborhood, making small talk. But every time he was about to laugh heartily, Eleanor would interject with a final, conversation-ending remark that cooled the air. Just as the short rib was served, the door opened and a young man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a simple button-down shirt. He bowed his head respectfully. Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. Hello, uncle, aunt. My parents were a little surprised, but smiled in return. Eleanor glanced at him, her tone neutral but sharp. You're just now arriving? The young man smiled sheepishly. I'm so sorry, something urgent came up at work. I guessed immediately that this was Ethan, Leo's younger brother. Ethan chose a seat next to his father. Before sitting, he looked at me and gave a slight nod. Clara. The way he said my name felt comfortable. It wasn't the overly familiar future sister-in-law, but a natural sign of respect. Ethan didn't say much. He ate slowly, occasionally serving his father, and asking my parents a few polite, well-timed questions. But I noticed he was a keen observer, especially whenever Eleanor posed a pointed question. When she did, Ethan would lower his head slightly, as if weighing the situation. At one point, Eleanor asked me, working for a multinational, your salary must be high. Girls with high salaries tend to spend a lot, don't they? I put down my fork, still smiling. I'm careful with my finances. I stick to a budget. Eleanor's lips curled into a smirk. A budget is good. But some things are better left in the hands of an elder, for safekeeping. I heard those words times for safekeeping times, and my heart skipped a beat. It was the exact same tone as her phone call. Only now, she was being more direct. I suddenly understood that she had prepared for this moment. The meal was just a formality. What she really wanted was to put me in a position where I had to obey. My mother looked at me, her eyes asking, Asterisk, are you okay? Asterisk. I gave a subtle nod. My father remained silent, but I saw his jaw tighten. At that moment, Ethan glanced at me briefly before quickly looking back down at his plate. That look wasn't one of curiosity. It was like a silent message. Asterisk, be careful, asterisk. The meal proceeded in a strange atmosphere. It wasn't tense enough for an argument, but it wasn't warm enough to be a joyous gathering. It felt like a chess match where one player had already set up the board, while the others still thought they were just attending a dinner party. When the waiter brought a pot of hot tea, Eleanor set her cup down very gently, but the sound of porcelain on saucer echoed like the rap of a gavel. She looked at my parents first, then directly at me. Her voice was slow and deliberate, no longer beating around the bush. I knew that what she was about to say was the main course. I sat up straighter, placing my hands in my lap to hide the fact that my palms were growing cold. A saying my mother often quoted flashed through my mind. A day on the road teaches you a basket of wisdom. I feared that today, I was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Leo sat beside me, his shoulders slightly hunched. Ethan was still quiet, but his expression was no longer casual. The steam from the tea rose in thin, wispy curls, and I understood that the steam wasn't just from the hot water. It was from a storm brewing right in the middle of our engagement dinner. Ethan had arrived late, but his tardiness didn't convey disrespect. On the contrary, he entered quietly, walked directly to the table, and bowed his head to greet each person individually, his words precise and polite. I noticed he greeted my parents first before turning to his own family, a natural way of compensating for his late arrival. That kind of courtesy wasn't for show. It was the ingrained habit of someone taught that, no matter what, you don't forget your manners. He pulled up a chair next to his father, Mr. Vance. He didn't try to sit next to his mother or create an alliance with her. He chose to sit with his father. As if by habit, he gravitated toward the quieter side of the family. Mr. Vance looked at his son, his expression softening slightly, as if someone had just entered and pulled him out of his isolation. I didn't try to engage Ethan in much conversation. At a meeting of in-laws, a latecomer's best strategy is to be discreet, not to become the center of attention. Ethan understood this. He simply smiled, served his father a piece of short rib, and then turned to my father. I hear from Leo that you were a history teacher your whole life. Sir, I have a great deal of respect for that profession. Teachers plant the seeds of knowledge and character. My father, who rarely praised anyone, nodded in approval. Every job has its challenges, but the most important thing is to live with integrity. Ethan smiled. Yes, sir, as they say, character before career. It was a simple exchange, but I saw my mother relax a little. I realized Ethan was trying to steer the conversation towards safe topics. Respect, integrity, the contributions of teachers, things that no one could argue against without looking ungrateful. He was choosing his words carefully. Eleanor sat opposite him, saying nothing. She just sipped her tea and set the cup down. The way she placed it was also practiced, light, yet firm, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. I noticed she glanced at Ethan a few times, the kind of look one gives a person who is speaking out of turn. Ethan knew, of course, but he continued to speak, albeit very diplomatically, avoiding any direct confrontation. A moment later, the waiter brought a fresh pot of hot tea. Ethan immediately stood up to receive it, his manners impeccable. "Allow me to pour for our guests." He poured for my parents first, then for his own parents, and finally for his older brother. The order was a subtle reminder. Today is a meeting of two families, and the bride's family are the honored guests. Beside me, Leo's expression eased slightly as he watched his younger brother. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I understood the feeling. In a house where you constantly have to read one person's mood, just having an ally in the room can make it easier to breathe. After pouring the tea, Ethan sat down and didn't try to dominate the conversation. He turned to me and asked a very normal, everyday question, as if to give me a moment of respite in the thickening atmosphere. "Clara, working on big projects, you must run into a lot of tricky situations." I gave a measured reply. "Sometimes, Ethan, but I'm used to it. When things get difficult, I just stick to the principles." Ethan nodded. "Principles are good. Without them, it's easy to get lost in deceit." I heard the word deceit, and it felt like he was speaking about something else entirely. But he didn't look at me for long. He glanced briefly at his mother, and then back down at his teacup. The way he avoided direct eye contact made me understand that he wanted to support me, but was also aware of his own precarious position in the family. If he spoke up and made his mother angry at the table, he would just become a pretext for her to escalate things. At that moment, Eleanor re-entered the conversation, her tone still a mix of inquiry and judgment. "Ethan, you see how it is today. Young women now make plenty of money, but if they don't know how to manage it, it's all a waste." Ethan lifted his teacup and smiled faintly. "Managing money is important, of course, but how you manage it in a way that keeps both people happy is also important." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "Are you trying to lecture me?" Ethan immediately lowered his voice, still respectful. "Of course not, Mom. I just think that a partnership works best when both partners are on the same page. Outsiders can offer advice, but ultimately, it's the two of them who have to live with the consequences." I saw clearly how Ethan used a general principle as a shield. It's hard to be accused of being disrespectful when you're speaking in platitudes. But Eleanor was still not pleased. She looked at her younger son, her gaze as sharp as a finely honed knife. "Mr." Vance fidgeted, as if he wanted to say something, but then he fell silent again. His silence made me understand even more clearly. In this family, Eleanor's word was the ceiling. Anyone who tried to stand up too tall would hit their head. My mother cleared her throat gently and changed the subject to something more neutral. The weather, the traffic, whether the city's autumn foliage was more or less vibrant this year. Ethan immediately picked up the thread, telling a small story about getting caught in a sudden shower by the Charles River, how he had to take shelter under an awning and met an old man selling roasted nuts who told him that autumn in Boston without roasted nuts was like Christmas without a tree. The story wasn't hilarious, but it was enough to make everyone smile and pull the atmosphere back from the brink. I looked at Ethan and felt my heart soften a little. In a tense crowd, the person who knows how to defuse the situation is invaluable. He wasn't taking my side by shouting slogans. He was taking it by ensuring my parents didn't feel isolated, by preventing the meeting from turning into a shouting match from the very beginning. But the calmer things got, the more I felt the storm was just being suppressed. Eleanor spoke less, but her eyes observed more. Leo grew quieter and quieter, as if afraid that opening his mouth would disrupt his mother's rhythm. I had the feeling that all the talk about foliage, nuts, and traffic was just a tablecloth spread over another, much heavier table underneath. Ethan noticed it too. I saw him occasionally clench his hand under the table, as if reminding himself to stay calm. At one point, he leaned over to serve his father more food, speaking just loud enough for the table to hear. "Dad, you should eat more. You've been out since this morning. Don't get too tired." Mr. Vance mumbled a soft thanks, his face relaxing. It was a simple, caring gesture, but I heard it as a reminder. In this family, someone was often forgotten. The tea was poured again. The steam rose, thin as smoke, curling around the faces that were smiling and talking. I set down my teacup and watched the surface of the water tremble slightly. In that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. Some people don't come to a gathering to offer blessings. They come to lay down the law. Ethan sat there, silent now, but his eyes were no longer carefree. I saw him look from his mother to his older brother, as if weighing how to speak without setting off an explosion. As for me, I told myself that if anything crossed my boundary, I would not let my parents be subjected to a single harsh word. A kind word can be a lifeline, but dignity cannot be bartered like a gift basket. And from the moment that steam began to rise, I knew I was about to have to defend that dignity with my own voice. The moment the waiter closed the door to the private room, the noise from the hallway was cut off abruptly. On the table, a fresh pot of tea had been poured, the liquid golden and fragrant. I lifted my cup and took a small sip, trying to steady my breathing. People say good tea depends on the water, and a good person on their character. But I knew today, no one was judging my character by how I poured tea or served food. They were judging me by something else entirely. Eleanor set her cup down, her eyes fixed on me, her voice slow, as if she were reading from a script prepared in her mind. Now that we've all eaten and met properly, I want to speak frankly so there are no misunderstandings later. Just that one sentence was enough to send a chill down my spine. Eleanor's speaking frankly wasn't about sincerity. It was about laying down the law. My father sat perfectly upright, showing no sign of displeasure. My mother looked down, her hands gently folding and refolding her napkin. But her gaze remained steady. Mr. Vance glanced at his wife, then at my father, as if he wanted to apologize on her behalf. But he said nothing. Beside me, Leo let out a soft cough, a reflexive act of avoidance. Eleanor continued. Clara, you work for a multinational. I hear the salary is quite substantial. Young women today are good at earning money, but many don't know how to hold on to it. They spend it on whims, frivolous shopping, and then when it's time to get married and have children, they complain about hardship. I maintained my smile and replied respectfully, I'm careful with my finances, Mrs. Vance. I don't spend extravagantly. Eleanor nodded, as if she had just confirmed a data point. Not spending extravagantly is good, but good is just what people say. A family needs a way to be certain. I looked directly at her, still addressing her with full respect. And how would you like to be certain, Mrs. Vance? My question wasn't a challenge. I simply disliked ambiguity. As a project manager, vagueness was my greatest enemy. Vagueness leads to misunderstanding, and misunderstanding leads to blame. I didn't want to plant that seed in my marriage. Eleanor took a sip of tea and then said the word she had been waiting to say. Starting next month, you will transfer 70% of your salary to me. I will hold it for you, as a future fund for you and Leo. The air in the room felt heavy, as if the oxygen had been sucked out. I could hear my own heart beating, but my face remained calm. My mother let out a tiny, sharp intake of breath, so small yet so telling of her restraint. My father's expression didn't change, but I saw the hand resting on his lap clench into a fist. Eleanor continued, her voice as placid as if she were discussing the weather. I won't spend a single dollar. I'll put it in a savings account under my name. Later, when you need to buy a house or have a child, I'll give it to you. Money left in the hands of a young couple. Today they buy this. Tomorrow they buy that. And soon, there's nothing left. A sharp pang went through me at the words under my name. Securing the future, but under someone else's name. It sounded like a kind gesture, but in reality, it was a door being locked from the outside. I tried to keep my voice soft. I appreciate your concern for our future, Mrs. Vance. It means a lot. But when it comes to our finances as a married couple, I think Leo and I should discuss and manage them ourselves. Eleanor set her cup down again. The clink of porcelain against the saucer was sharper this time, louder than the hum of the air conditioner. She looked at me, her gaze piercing, but her tone still maintained a veneer of civility. You haven't even married into this family, and you're already talking about managing it yourselves. That sounds very nice in theory. But let me be honest, our family has standards. A daughter-in-law who joins this family must follow those standards. Beside me, Leo's face seemed to shrink, his head bowing low. I waited for him to say something, anything. Just one sentence, like, Mom, let Clara and I talk about this. But he was silent, like someone waiting for a storm to pass, too afraid to even open a window. Eleanor turned to my parents, her tone shifting to one of a superior offering guidance. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, as educators, I'm sure you understand. For a woman with a family, the most important thing is to be a good homemaker. And to be a good homemaker, you need someone to hold the purse strings securely. I'm doing this for their future. My mother forced a smile, her lips tight. Yes, everyone worries about the future. But shouldn't these things be decided by the two of them? Eleanor cut her off cleanly. her voice not loud but firm. Whether they agree or not is a matter of upbringing. If you don't teach them from the beginning, you won't be able to teach them later. I heard those words times teach them from the beginning times, and a fire ignited within me. Asterisk. From the beginning times meant today, right here, at this dinner table. I understood this wasn't advice. It was a move to put a leash on me. I turned to look at Leo. He was still looking down, his eyes avoiding mine. A kind man can be endearing, but when it's time to stand up and protect someone, that same kindness can turn into a dull knife, cutting into the heart of the person beside him. Across the table, Ethan held his chopsticks but wasn't eating. I saw him look from his mother to me, his eyes full of deliberation. He clearly wanted to speak, but was censoring himself, as if one wrong word would set everything ablaze. Eleanor turned back to me, adding another layer of logic to her argument. Let me be specific. Your salary is around, what, $90,000 a year. So about $7,500 a month. 70% of that is about $5,250. You'll still have enough for your personal expenses. A working woman should dress neatly, not extravagantly. That's all you need. The larger sum, I'll keep it for you. It's safer that way. I almost laughed at the way she said enough for your personal expenses, as if I were a teenager receiving an allowance. But I held it back. I replied slowly, your calculations are very clear, Mrs. Vance. But with all due respect, I'm not comfortable with the idea of handing over my finances for someone else to manage. I'm an adult. Eleanor's brows furrowed. So, you don't trust me? I looked her straight in the eye. It's not about trust. It's about respect. I believe marriage requires mutual respect, and respect means allowing two people to be responsible for the money they earn. The atmosphere grew heavy again. My father finally spoke, his voice low but powerful. Ma'am, my daughter works and earns her own money. She knows her responsibilities. If she and Leo have plans to buy a house or start a family, they will discuss it themselves. Elders can offer advice, but they should not impose their will. Eleanor looked at my father, her smile completely gone. Impose? That's a strong word. I'm simply stating a principle. My family is not accustomed to a do-as-you-please attitude. When you join this family, you follow our ways. My father's voice remained even. For a principle to last, it must be fair. I saw Eleanor lean forward slightly, her voice as cold as a nail being hammered into wood. All right, let's not waste any more time. If you agree, we'll discuss a wedding date. If you don't agree, then my family will have to withdraw our offer. We'll cancel the engagement right now, to be clear. The word cancel landed on the table like a sledgehammer. My mother's face went pale, her eyes instantly welling up. I heard her take a sharp breath, trying to swallow her tears. Mr. Vance looked flustered, his lips moving as if to speak, but then he fell silent, as was his habit. As for Leo, his hands, hidden under the table, clenched into fists, but he still said nothing. I suddenly understood. That ultimatum wasn't just for me. It was for Leo too. Eleanor was demonstrating her power in front of everyone. At that moment, Ethan shifted in his seat. His voice was very quiet but audible, still perfectly respectful. Mom, maybe we should let Leo and Clara talk about the money themselves first. Today is just about the family's meeting. Eleanor shot him a look as sharp as a blade. Ethan, be quiet. Just one word. Quiet. Ethan immediately fell silent. He lowered his head, but I could see the tips of his ears turning red with suppressed anger. He had tried to intervene, but he was not allowed. I sat still for a few seconds. In my mind, this was no longer about 70% of my salary. It was about my dignity being placed on a scale. It was about someone trying to slip a noose around my neck in front of my parents. I could feel my father trying to control his anger, my mother trying to maintain her composure. And I realized that if I didn't handle this carefully, this dinner would become a stage for my parents' further humiliation. I took a deep breath. I looked at Eleanor, then at my parents, then turned to Leo. He was still looking down. His silence at that moment hurt more than the ultimatum. I set down my teacup. My hand was steady. My voice was still soft, but clear. Mrs. Vance, I've heard what you have to say. I paused for a beat, to let everyone know that I wasn't panicking, wasn't begging. In my heart, an old saying echoed like a mantra. Asterisk. An honest tree fears no storm asterisk. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew one thing for sure. I would not let myself be priced like an item for sale at my own engagement dinner. After I said, "I've heard what you have to say," the room fell into another silence. It was the kind of silence where no one dared to breathe too loudly, as if the gentle clink of a spoon could shatter the tension-filled bowl. Eleanor didn't press me immediately. She sat very straight, her eyes never leaving me, like someone examining an object at an auction, waiting for a bid. Except this object could talk. My father maintained his dignified posture, but I could see the veins on his hands standing out. My mother was trying to smile, a smile as thin as paper. I knew she was fighting to preserve her dignity and mine. A pang of emotion shot through me. A single misspoken word now, and the price wouldn't just be this engagement, but my parents' honor being turned into dinner party gossip. Leo sat beside me, his shoulders hunched as if he wanted to shrink and disappear. I didn't need a hero. I didn't need him to scream at his mother, but I needed him to say just one thing to fulfill his role. Yet he remained so silent that I could hear my own heart pounding with a painful ache. Sometimes, silence isn't neutrality, it's choosing a side. Across the table, Ethan kept his head down, but I saw his eyes darting towards me and then quickly away. He understood the situation, but he was also bound by his position as a son. I didn't blame him. I just felt a sense of pity. In this house, the one who spoke the truth was often the one who had to be silent. Eleanor cleared her throat, as if to underscore her point one more time. "Well, Clara, think it over. I'm only going to say this once. If you agree, we'll all be happy. If not, then so be it." Her "so be it" was spoken lightly, but it was a knife held at the ready. I looked her straight in the eye, my voice still soft and measured. Yes, I would like to respond. I turned to my parents first, a gesture of respect in a family that valued decorum. My father didn't speak, but his eyes told me, "Say what you believe is right." My mother gave a slight nod, her lips trembling. I gently squeezed her hand under the table for a second, then let go. It wasn't for her to lean on me, but to reassure her that I was not alone in this. I turned back to Eleanor, my smile, polite. "Mrs. Vance, I understand you're worried about your children's future. I appreciate that concern." I saw the corners of her mouth twitch upwards. She thought I was about to yield. People accustomed to being in control often assume they can predict how others will react under pressure. They'll either fight back or fold. She didn't expect a third option. At that moment, Leo looked up, his eyes brightening with the hope that things were about to be smoothed over. I glanced at him, a bitter taste in my mouth. If a man expected his fiancée to yield before they were even married, how long would that yielding have to last once they were? I continued, my voice steady, each word clear. "I agree to your proposal. However, I would like to set a few conditions to ensure fairness for both sides. After all, marriage is a partnership." Eleanor's eyes immediately narrowed. The tension in the room coiled another turn tighter. I didn't look at her right away. I looked directly at Leo. This was my moment to make him understand. I wasn't speaking to win a battle against his mother. I was speaking to test if he had what it took to be a husband. But he looked down again, as quickly as someone recoiling from a spotlight. I turned back to Eleanor. "Condition number 1. If I am to give you 70% of my salary for safekeeping, then Leo will also give 70% of his salary to my parents for safekeeping. My parents are retired teachers. They live an orderly life, and they are meticulous with their records. With both families holding funds and sharing the responsibility, that would be truly fair." As I finished, my father's eyebrows raised slightly, but he didn't object. My mother's eyes widened in surprise. Mr. Vance stared at the table, as if he had just heard something he never expected anyone to say in front of his wife. Leo's face went pale. As for Eleanor, her expression shifted from victorious to stunned, like someone holding a measuring tape who suddenly had the other end pulled back at them. Eleanor's voice was strained, though she tried to maintain her composure. "What are you saying? Are you comparing your parents to me?" I remained gentle. "Not at all. I'm simply going by your logic that this is for safekeeping for our future. If it's for safekeeping, then who holds the funds doesn't matter, as long as it's transparent. If only I am required to hand over my salary while Leo is not, I'm afraid outsiders might get the impression that I'm being controlled." The word outsiders was a soft but heavy blow. For someone as concerned with appearances as Eleanor, what outsiders thought was often the sharpest blade. Her lips tightened. I knew she was swallowing her anger. I pressed on before she could pivot the conversation to scolding me. "Condition number 2. Household chores will be split equally. Cooking, laundry, cleaning. It's not acceptable for the woman to come home from a full day of work and do everything. A partnership that lasts is one where both people contribute. At this, Leo shifted, as if he wanted to say he was capable of that. But he stopped himself. I didn't need a promise made under duress. I needed to see the real attitude later. I looked directly at Eleanor and stated my third condition, my voice a little firmer. Condition number 3. All major decisions for our nuclear family, buying a house, a car, family planning, career changes will be discussed and decided by my husband and me. We will be responsible for our own choices. The elders on both sides can offer advice when asked. Otherwise, we ask that you respect our autonomy. That last sentence, though spoken politely, was understood by everyone as a boundary line. Eleanor let out a short, humorless laugh. You're very clever with your words. But you are still an outsider. You haven't even set foot in our home, and you're already setting conditions. I replied immediately, not letting the word outsider sting my parents. Yes, it is precisely because I am an outsider that I must be clear from the beginning, so that later, when I am part of the family, I won't be accused of having ulterior motives. I despise ambiguity. At that moment, Ethan shifted slightly. I saw him open his mouth to speak, but Eleanor shot him a look that silenced him. He immediately closed his mouth, his hands clenching and unclenching. He couldn't support me with words anymore, but I read the support in his forced silence. Mr. Vance coughed softly, as if trying to mediate. Perhaps we can discuss this later. Eleanor whipped her head towards her husband, her voice not loud but hard as steel. You be quiet. Let me handle this. Mr. Vance shrank back, looking down again. In that instant, I understood why Leo was the way he was. A man who grows up in a house where the father always yields and the mother always decides will learn to see silence as safety. Eleanor turned back to me, her voice turning cold. You speak of fairness, but let me ask you, do you even know what it means to be a daughter-in-law? It means knowing your place. It means listening to your elders. My voice remained even. Yes, I know my place. I just believe that listening is different from being controlled. I want to join a family with respect. At this, my mother could no longer hold back. Her eyes glistened with tears. My father placed a hand on her shoulder, a gentle but firm touch that kept her from breaking down completely. I felt a lump in my own throat, but I swallowed it. I could not afford to be weak now. Eleanor looked at me for a long moment, then spat out each word. All right, you're very clever, but my family is not looking for a daughter-in-law who argues semantics. If you will not follow my family's principles, then we'll stop right here. We'll cancel everything. No need to waste more time. I heard the word cancel again, but this time, I no longer felt fear. I only saw Eleanor's true nature with stark clarity. She didn't want a marriage for her son. She wanted a new recruit to fall in line so she could continue to be in charge. I turned to Leo one last time. He still wouldn't look at me. His back was hunched over, as if he were hoping I would just give in so he wouldn't have to make a choice. And in that moment, I understood a bitter truth. If I yielded today, I would have to yield forever. I would yield until I was no longer myself. I lifted my head and looked directly at Eleanor, my voice still polite but resolute. You've made your position clear, Mrs. Vance, and I've made mine clear. The decision is now up to you and your family. I didn't beg, didn't argue, didn't cry. I just sat up straight, a person who had drawn her line in the sand. No one else in the room spoke, but I knew that from that moment on, this engagement dinner was no longer a meeting. It was a confrontation between power and self-respect. The moment I finished speaking, the room plunged into an uncomfortable silence. It wasn't the silence of understanding, but the silence of a guitar string pulled taut, waiting for someone to snap it. Eleanor stared at me for a long time, her gaze sweeping over me from my hair, to my shoulders, to the way I rested my hands on the table, as if searching for a weakness to exploit. Leo, beside me, was pale as a ghost. He didn't look at me, nor at his mother. He stared into his teacup as if it were a pit he was about to fall into. I felt a pang of pity for him, but it was the kind of pity that comes with a bitter realization, a pity that couldn't pull him out of his own weakness. Mr. Vance cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe we can talk about this later. Eleanor didn't even turn to him, just smirked. Later? What is there to talk about later? So, she can go home and come up with even more conditions? The way she made my mother flinch. I saw my mother place a hand on her chest, as if she'd just been physically pushed. My father remained silent, but his eyes darkened. I knew that for a man who had spent his life commanding respect in a classroom, that kind of dismissive pronoun was the deepest, quietest insult. I kept my voice calm. Mrs. Vance, I'm not setting conditions to win a power struggle. I just want everything to be clear from the start. Eleanor scoffed. Clear. What you want to be clear is that you're in charge, isn't it? You think because you work for some fancy multinational and use a few corporate buzzwords, everyone has to listen to you. I didn't understand why she had to bring my job into it, but I understood her goal: to demote me from someone talking about principles to a disrespectful, arrogant young woman. Across the table, Ethan quietly set down his chopsticks. He didn't look at me, but stared into his teacup as if reminding himself not to get angry. I could see the muscles in his neck tense. He wanted to speak, but he knew that one wrong word and Eleanor would have the excuse she needed to brand him a rebellious son, corrupted by a future sister-in-law. Eleanor turned to my parents, her voice rising a notch, still with the sharp clarity of someone used to being heard. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, what kind of daughter did you raise that she's counting every penny? She hasn't even married into the family, and she's already demanding to split chores, split power, split money. Why would my family want someone like that? So, she can walk all over her husband? My mother's face flushed crimson, her lips trembling. I knew she wanted to argue back, but she was afraid of being labeled as shrewish. It was my father who finally spoke, his voice low, each word landing with weight. Ma'am, we taught our daughter to have self-respect. When she speaks of fairness, she means fairness. There is nothing calculating about it. Eleanor immediately aimed her fire at him. You call yourself an educator and say that? What's fair about demanding my son's salary be sent to your house? She's the one marrying into my family, not the other way around. At that, a small, weary sigh escaped my lips. She had finally said what she truly believed. This wasn't about safekeeping or the future. It was about ownership. It was the belief that a daughter-in-law becomes the property of the husband's family, while the husband's family owes nothing in return. I looked directly at her, maintaining my composure. Mrs. Vance, I have not yet married into your family. I'm sitting here as a person about to enter into a marriage. I want it to be based on mutual respect. Eleanor slammed her palm flat on the table. The sharp times thwack times made everyone jump. The teacups rattled, water sloshing over the rims. Respect? You talk about respect when you dare to set conditions for me. Who do you think you are? Mr. Vance quickly reached out a hand, as if to calm his wife. Eleanor, please, let's keep our voices down. She swatted his hand away. You be quiet. You've been quiet your whole life. Don't start trying to teach me now. The words were a public slap in the face to her husband. He bowed his head, his ears burning with shame. I saw Leo squeeze his eyes shut, as if he wished he could vanish from the room. At that point, I stopped expecting anything from him. He had chosen silence as his survival mechanism, and that silence was destroying everything. Eleanor turned back to me, her voice hissing through her teeth. Fine. You're so clever. Go and find another family. My family doesn't need a daughter-in-law who acts high and mighty before she's even married. Then she whirled on my parents, her tone dripping with sarcasm. A house leaks from the roof. If you raise a daughter like this, don't come crying to us when she ends up miserable. My mother could no longer hold back. Tears streamed down her face, but she tried to keep her voice from breaking. That's a very hurtful thing to say. My daughter has done nothing disrespectful. Eleanor let out another derisive laugh. Crying? What's the point of crying? My family doesn't fall for histrionics. My father shot to his feet. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, a sound so jarring it startled me. He looked directly at Eleanor, his voice not loud, but as cold and hard as steel. Ma'am, you may disagree with my daughter, but you have no right to insult her. My daughter is not a piece of merchandise for you to haggle over, nor is she a servant coming to your house to have her salary and her every breath controlled. In that moment, the room seemed to freeze. The words merchandise and haggle articulated exactly what I had been trying to suppress. But coming from my father, they weren't just part of an argument. They were a moral judgment. Mr. Vance stood up, flustered. Please, please, let's all calm down. We can sort this out. But Eleanor had already grabbed her purse and shot to her feet, her face red, her eyes blazing. There's nothing to sort out. We're canceling. Canceling right now. What's the point of an engagement like this? She spun around and marched towards the door. Leo, in a panic, jumped up reflexively. Mom! Mom, wait! He scrambled after her, so fast he nearly knocked over a chair. I sat frozen, my heart feeling as if it had been squeezed in a vice. Not because I was afraid of the engagement being canceled, but because of the brutal, undeniable truth. In the moment of decision, he chose his mother, leaving me to face my parents, to face everyone, alone. Ethan also stood up, but he had only taken one step when Eleanor's voice, sharp as a whip, cut through the air from the doorway. Ethan, stay put. He froze, his hands clenched into tight fists. He watched his brother go, then turned to look at my parents. His eyes were full of apology and helplessness. He bowed his head deeply. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. I am so sorry. It was a short apology, but in it, I heard the last remaining shred of decency in the wreckage of the evening. The door to the private room opened and closed. The sound of hurried footsteps faded down the hall. We were left in the room with a half-eaten meal that was growing cold and hearts that were already frozen. I reached over to steady my mother, feeling her shoulders tremble. My father stood there, breathing heavily, his eyes fixed on the door that had just closed. I didn't cry. I just heard a saying echo in my head. Asterisk gold is tested by fire. A person by adversity asterisk. It turned out the test wasn't about 70% of my salary. The test was to see if I would bow my head in exchange for a wedding. And the test for Leo was to see if he had the courage to stand by the woman he claimed to love. I sat there, my back straight, as if holding myself together. The engagement dinner, in any meaningful sense, was over. I don't remember how I managed to stand up and leave that room. I only remember that when I stepped out into the hallway, the restaurant's warm, yellow light shone on the polished tile floor, making everything look unnaturally clean, a sterile kind of clean that felt cold. Other diners were still laughing, still calling out to each other to take pictures, still offering toasts to 100 years of happiness. I felt like I had just walked through someone else's wedding reception, a place where I was completely out of step. My father walked ahead, each step firm and deliberate, not rushed, as if he were forcing himself to maintain decorum while a storm raged inside him. My mother walked beside me, her hand gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. I could hear her breathing shallowly, crying to keep her sobs from escaping. I wanted to hug her right then, but I was afraid that if I did, she would break completely. Sometimes, people put on a brave face, not because they're strong, but because they are not allowed to be weak. As we reached the lobby, the hostess smiled and asked softly, "Are you leaving now?" I nodded, unable to speak. My father answered for me, his voice still polite. "Yes, thank you." The hostess bowed her head, unaware that she had just bid farewell not to a party, but to a collapse. Outside, the autumn wind was sharp. I pulled my mother's coat tighter around her shoulders. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Are you cold?" Her question pierced my heart. In the midst of her own pain, after her daughter had been so disrespected, she was still worried about me being cold. That was the essence of a mother's love, worrying about her child even when she herself was trembling. A taxi pulled up. My father opened the door for my mother before getting into the front seat. I sat in the back with her. As the car pulled away, I glanced back at the restaurant one last time. A corner of the window reflected the streetlights, sparkling like a beautiful trap. I didn't see Leo. I didn't see the man who had pulled out my chair just a few hours ago, the man who had promised, "I'm here for you." There was only his absence, and it was louder than any insult. No one spoke in the taxi. The hum of the heater and the sound of the tires on the pavement were the only noises. I stared out the window at Boston lighting up for the evening. People were heading to dinner, going for walks, buying hot chocolate. The city was indifferent, as if my personal drama was of no consequence. It's true that everyone lives their own life, but at that moment, it felt like I had been pushed off a boat, with the shore impossibly far away. Finally, my mother could no longer hold it in. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, without a sound, just two glistening tracks. I pulled a tissue from my purse and handed it to her. She took it, quickly wiped her eyes, and turned away, as if she didn't want the driver to see. Older people are often like that. Even in pain, they must maintain their dignity. In the front seat, my father remained silent. I could see his reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, but his jaw was clenched tight. A man who had maintained his authority in a classroom his whole life now sat as still as a statue. He was silent not because he had nothing to say, but because if he spoke, He might say things a daughter shouldn't hear. I wondered what would happen if I started crying. My mother would probably hold me, and my father would erupt in anger. But I didn't cry. I just felt a hollowness inside me, a frightening emptiness because it wasn't loud. It was like having the air sucked out of your lungs while still being forced to sit up straight. The taxi crossed a bridge, the yellow streetlights stretching out like a golden thread. I suddenly remembered the look on Leo's face as he ran after his mother, panicked, rushed, without a single glance back. That image replayed in my mind like a short, looped film. I didn't blame him for running after his mother out of a sense of duty. I was just hurt that he ran after her and left me behind like a stranger. "Clara," my mother whispered. I turned to her. She looked at me, her voice choked with emotion. "Are you okay?" I wanted to say I'm fine, but the words were stuck in my throat. All I could manage was, "I'm still here." "Mom." She took my hand. It was cold. "I love you, and I'm so afraid you'll be unhappy." I tried to smile for her. "Mom, the greatest unhappiness is the one we inflict on ourselves." "I won't do that." From the front seat, my father suddenly spoke, his voice low and slow. "Clara." "Yes, Dad?" He didn't turn around, just spoke straight ahead, like a commandment. "You did nothing wrong." Those 4 words made my eyes sting. He continued in the same, even tone. "You spoke of fairness, of boundaries. That was right. Don't ever yield on what's right just because you're afraid of what people will say. You yield once, and they'll think you can take it, and then there will be a next time." I held my mother's hand tighter. I knew my father was furious, but he was reining it in so as not to turn my evening into a lecture. My mother sniffled. "But people will talk." My father let out a sharp breath, his voice firm. "Let them. We don't live our lives according to gossip. A wise bird sings a clear song. Let them sing whatever they want. As long as our daughter has integrity, that's what matters." I looked out the window at a long red light and suddenly understood that true support wasn't a promise of "I'm here for you." It was my parents' simple declaration: "You did nothing wrong." When we got back to our neighborhood, my father paid the driver and even told him to drive safely. My mother led me up the front steps of our brownstone, each worn step echoing our footsteps. When she opened the door, the familiar scent of wood polish and old books welcomed us, so comforting that it made me want to collapse. Some places, you just have to step inside to feel safe. My mother went to the kitchen to put on the kettle, her hands still trembling. My father went straight to the mantelpiece, lit a candle, and stood there in silence for a moment. I sank onto the sofa, looking at my shoes, still clean, while my heart felt muddied. I thought of the wine, the chocolates, the thoughtful gifts we had brought, which had ended up as props in a power play. My phone buzzed. A text from Leo appeared on the screen. Just 3 words. "Are you home?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unable to type a reply. How could I answer? That yes, I was home, but my spirit was not. That I still loved him, but now I was afraid. That today, he ran after his mother. But what would he run after tomorrow? I turned the phone face down. My father came over from the mantelpiece and looked at me. "Get some sleep tonight. We'll figure things out tomorrow." I nodded. My mother placed a warm mug in front of me, her voice soft. "Drink this. It will warm you up." I held the mug, the steam rising, and making my eyes water. I didn't cry out loud. I just heard a simple truth ring in my head. The scariest thing in life isn't being poor. It's marrying the wrong person. The Boston night was quiet, but inside me, a wound had opened. A wound called silence. The next morning, a fine mist hung over Boston. Not enough to soak your coat, but enough to chill your heart. I woke up early, made a pot of ginger tea for my mother, and then sat down at my desk, just like any other day. The project was still running. Emails were still coming in. And life demanded that I be on time and on task, as if nothing had happened the night before. Only the dull ache in my chest couldn't be switched off. Gossip travels faster than fiber optics. In our close-knit neighborhood, all it took was for someone to see my mother on the street for the questions to start. "So, how was the engagement dinner?" My mother would smile and deflect, but when she came home, she would sit by the window, lost in thought. My father didn't say much, just one thing: don't let their words lead you by the nose. I knew he was afraid I would soften because of the social pressure. In our society, some things bind you tighter than any legal document: reputation, public opinion, the shelf life of an unmarried woman. As for Leo, he vanished. No calls, no visits. Just that one text: "Are you home?" And then silence. I didn't reply. Not because I was playing hard to get, but because I was afraid that if I opened that door, I would just drag myself back to the same place. 8 days later, a new text from Leo arrived. Can I please see you? Just for a little while. I'm begging you. I read the message, my hand freezing on my keyboard. Part of me wanted to say no, to spare myself the pain. But another part wanted to look him in the eye and find out, once and for all, if he was still the man I thought I could trust. We met at a small coffee shop on a quiet street. It wasn't crowded, private enough to talk without being overheard. I arrived 10 minutes early and ordered a black coffee. I didn't order tea. Tea reminded me of the engagement dinner and the sound of a teacup being set down like a gavel. Leo arrived late, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. He pulled out the chair opposite me and looked at me as if I were about to leave forever. He spoke first, his voice hoarse. How have you been? I kept my answer short. I've been going to work, as usual. He nodded, then rushed to speak, as if afraid I would get up and leave. My mom, her blood pressure has been high the last few days. She can't sleep. She keeps saying that you and your family humiliated her in front of everyone. I heard the word humiliated and my heart grew cold. I didn't interrupt. I let him finish. People often reveal their true colors when they think they're in the right. Leo looked down, his hands clasped together. I know my mom went too far, but could you just give in for a little while? Just for a while, to keep the peace. We can figure things out later. I looked at him and asked slowly, given on what? He stammered. On the future fund. Just give her the money to hold. My mom doesn't need it. She just wants to be sure. She's just testing you. Testing me? Those two words were like a drop of ice water on my neck. I let out a humorless laugh. Let me get this straight. Your mother is testing me by issuing an ultimatum and insulting my parents. Leo flinched, quickly trying to backtrack. No, I'm not defending her. It's just, I'm afraid she'll get really sick. When she gets worked up, it's dangerous. I set my coffee cup down and looked him straight in the eye. Leo, listen to me very carefully. You cannot build respect on a foundation of control. Today, I hand over my money. Tomorrow, I hand over my right to live my own life. If I yield once, there will be a second time and a third. And each time, you'll tell me it's because your mother is sick? He was speechless, his eyes turning red. But it's hard for me too. I'm stuck in the middle, between her and you. I didn't raise my voice, but I spoke slowly, letting each word sink in. No. You're not stuck between your mother and me. You're stuck between growing up and remaining a son who is afraid of his mother. If you're going to start a family, but still let your mother make your decisions, then what's the point of getting married? Leo was silent. This time, it wasn't the evasive silence of the restaurant. It was the silence of someone who had been hit where it hurts. I took a thin envelope out of my bag and placed it on the table. Leo looked at it as if it were a strange object. What's this? An appointment for premarital counseling with Dr. Evans, a family therapist. Leo frowned. A therapist? I nodded. Yes. Our problem isn't the 70%. The problem is that you haven't cut the psychological umbilical cord with your mother. I'm giving you one last chance. I laid it out clearly, like a project timeline. This Saturday, 9 a.m., you come with me. If you don't show up, or if you show up still thinking that your wife has to sacrifice her dignity for your peace, then we're done. No more arguments. Leo stared at me for a long time. For the first time, I saw genuine confusion in his eyes, like someone standing before a door. If he walks through, he has to change. If he doesn't, he loses everything. Just then, my phone vibrated. A short text from Ethan. Clara, stand your ground. I can't say much, but you're doing the right thing. I read it and didn't reply, but I felt a small, solid stone settle into place in my heart. It turned out someone in that family still understood what was right. I looked up at Leo. Don't ask me to yield. Ask yourself for courage. As we stood up to leave, the fine mist was still falling outside. Leo reached out as if to take my hand, then pulled it back. I didn't offer mine. It wasn't out of anger. It was because I understood that some gaps a person has to cross on their own. If they can't, pulling them is useless. I turned and walked away, my steps slow but steady on the wet pavement. My father's words echoed in my head about a woman being defined by her character. But I added my own line. Character isn't about silent submission. It's about knowing how to preserve yourself, your home, and the line between right and wrong, so they never become blurred. I got home as the sky was turning dark. The mist had stopped, but the courtyard of our brownstone was still damp, the earthy smell clinging to the air. My mother was hanging some towels on the line. When she saw me, she asked, her voice deliberately light, "Did you see him?" I nodded. I didn't give her the details. I just said, I gave him one last chance. We're going to counseling on Saturday. My mother looked at me, her eyes a mix of worry and love, then turned away, as if she didn't want me to see them welling up. My father, as usual, was watching the evening news, but I knew he wasn't paying attention. He asked just one question. Is he going to stand up for himself? I replied, I don't know yet. I'll judge by his actions. My father nodded and said no more. That meant a few words, every one of them was like a milestone. I had just gone to my room when my phone rang. An unknown number. Before I could answer, the landline in the living room began to ring shrilly. My mother jumped and picked it up. She had barely said hello when her face went white. I walked out and saw her standing frozen, holding the receiver as if it were red hot. The woman's voice on the other end was so loud and clear, I could hear every word without needing speakerphone. Is this Mrs. Hayes? This is Eleanor Vance, Leo's mother. My mother swallowed hard, still trying to be polite. Yes, this is she. Eleanor didn't beat around the bush. Let me be frank. What kind of daughter did you raise that she would be so disrespectful in front of her future in-laws? She embarrassed me. Now, you need to teach her a lesson. Have her come to my house tomorrow and apologize. If not, don't blame me for what happens next. My mother's voice trembled. Mrs. Vance, my daughter was only speaking about fairness. Fairness? Eleanor let out a sharp, derisive laugh over the phone. The kind of fairness that involves demanding my son send his money to your house. If your family is poor, just say so. Don't hide behind a curtain of principles. I heard the word poor, and my ears burned, but I didn't snatch the phone away. I looked at my father. He was already on his feet, his face a cold mask. He walked over and gestured for my mother to give him the phone. He took the receiver, his voice low and clear. Hello, ma'am. This is Clara's father. There was a pause on the other end, then Eleanor's voice, strained with anger. You were a teacher, and this is how you raise your child? My father's voice didn't rise. I taught my child to have self-respect. My daughter did not insult anyone. If you consider fairness an insult, then I believe you are mistaken. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. Don't you lecture me. Is she coming to apologize tomorrow or not? If not, I'll call my relatives and tell the whole neighborhood what kind of daughter you've raised. My father cut her off, his voice still even, but firm. You can say whatever you like. My family doesn't live by the words of outsiders. But from now on, do not call this number again. With that, he gently placed the receiver back in its cradle, as if putting a final period on a sentence. My mother looked at him, her eyes full of tears. Honey, he just said, it's all right. Don't let them drag us down to their level. I stood there, my heart aching for my parents, but also chilled to the bone. I understood Eleanor's strategy. She wasn't attacking me directly. She was attacking my parents, their reputation as educators, their fear of public shame. A direct hit to their softest spot. Less than 10 minutes later, my cell phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized but hadn't saved. Aunt Carol, Eleanor's sister. I answered, keeping my voice polite. Hello, Aunt Carol. She laughed, her voice sweet as syrup. Oh, Clara, dear, I heard what happened, and my heart just goes out to you. A young woman working so hard, only to have a misunderstanding like this. Why don't you meet me for a little while this afternoon? We can talk things over and smooth everything out. I knew what smoothing things out meant. It meant I had to apologize so they could declare victory. I didn't refuse outright. A direct refusal would just give them more ammunition to call me disrespectful. I replied, of course. If you could give me the address, I'd be happy to meet with you. We met at a small cafe near a park. It had a few plastic tables and chairs. The sound of traffic whizzed by, and the smell of roasting chestnuts filled the air. Aunt Carol was already there, wearing a floral blouse, her hair perfectly coiffed, her face bright as if she were at a wedding. As soon as she saw me, she grabbed my hand. Come sit with me, dear. Don't be so tense. I sat down, not pulling my hand away immediately, but not letting her hold it for long either. She ordered me an iced tea and got straight to it. This whole thing is not such a big deal. You know how Leo's mother is. Older people are very proud. Just apologize to her and let it go. You know what they say, a soft answer turns away wrath. I looked at her slowly. You're right, Aunt Carol. Keeping the peace is important. But could you tell me, what exactly am I apologizing for? Aunt Carol hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Well, for setting conditions in front of both families. It made her lose face. I nodded. I see. And when she demanded 70% of my salary and threatened to cancel the wedding in front of my parents, did my parents not lose face? Her eyes darted away. Oh, that's just an elder worrying about her children's finances. My voice remained soft, but each word was distinct. I appreciate the concern. But concern does not mean holding my money in her name. Nor does it mean insulting my parents by calling them poor and saying they raised a disrespectful daughter. I am not arguing with an elder. I am simply asking for respect. Aunt Carol sighed, shifting to a more lecturing tone. Clara, my dear, when you get married, you have to learn to be flexible. If you're too rigid, you'll only make yourself miserable. I smiled. I agree. Being flexible for the sake of peace is good. But being so flexible that you lose yourself isn't peace. It's surrender. I can adapt, but I have to do it within the bounds of decency. Aunt Carol's face soured, but she still tried to sound sweet. So you're just going to let this escalate? If you don't hold on to a man like that, you'll lose him. I looked her straight in the eye. If a man is so afraid of his mother that he lets the person he loves be humiliated, then even if I hold on to him by a lifetime of yielding, I will never have peace. I have given Leo a chance to grow up by going to counseling. As for an apology, I will only apologize when I have done something wrong. I stood up and bowed my head slightly. Thank you for meeting with me, Aunt Carol. I have to be going now. She called after me, Clara, don't be foolish. I didn't turn back. The greatest foolishness is knowing you're being led into a swamp and taking another step. When I got home, I saw that my father had unplugged the landline and set it aside. He said, from now on, if anyone wants to say something, tell them to talk to me. You focus on Saturday. I nodded. My mother took my hand. It was warmer than it had been earlier. Do what you think is right, dear. We are not going to let you face this alone. I went to my room and opened my laptop, looking at my work calendar. The project timeline was long, but the timeline of my own life could not be managed by someone else. I sent Leo one single, clear text message. Saturday, 9 a.m. I'll be waiting at the therapist's office. The decision is yours. I put my phone down. Outside, the wind rustled through the leaves of a large oak tree. I suddenly felt a sense of calm. Once you've built a boundary, no one can tear it down, unless you yourself decide to step back. At exactly 9 a.m. on Saturday, I stood in front of the office building on Beacon Street. The sky was clear, the morning sun bright but not harsh. I had arrived 5 minutes early, not out of anxiety, but because I wanted to face this moment with agency. I had been clear. I didn't need promises. I needed action. And that action began with showing up on time. The lobby was small, with the faint scent of eucalyptus and the steady hum of the air conditioning. I sat down in a waiting room chair, my back straight, my hands resting on my purse. I didn't look at my phone. I just watched the front door. A thought popped into my head. Asterisk. Honesty is the best policy, asterisk. Then I corrected myself. Asterisk, honesty must be paired with courage. Otherwise, it just becomes an excuse for others to hurt you, asterisk. At 8:59, the glass door opened. Leo walked in. He wore a light blue button-down shirt. His hair was combed, but his eyes were still dark with exhaustion. He saw me, paused for a half second, and then walked over. His voice was low. I'm here. I nodded. Okay, that was all. I didn't praise him, nor did I mock him. I didn't want him to think that his presence here was a favor. It was the bare minimum responsibility of someone who wanted to get married. Leo sat down next to me. I could hear him take a deep, shuddering breath. He spoke, as if to preemptively explain himself. I had to lie to my mom. I told her I was meeting a client. If she knew I was here, she'd lose it. I looked at him. You made it here. The rest is on you. He didn't reply, but I saw him swallow hard. At exactly 9 o'clock, a nurse called us in. The counseling room was with a neutral-colored sofa, a bookshelf, and a few small plants. Dr. Evans was a woman in her late 40s, with a calm voice and a direct but non-judgmental gaze. She invited us to sit and set the ground rules immediately. Today, we're not here to find out who is right and who is wrong. We're here to understand the dynamics that are binding you, and, if you choose, to learn how to untie them. Leo sat with his shoulders slightly hunched. I sat up straight, but not rigidly. I knew that if I turned this session into a trial, Leo would retreat back into his silence. The doctor asked, "Who initiated this meeting?" I answered simply, "I suggested it." Leo immediately added, as if afraid she'd think he was forced, "But I wanted to come, too. I don't want to lose Clara." Dr. Evans nodded. "All right, Leo, let's start with you. Why do you find it so difficult to stand up to your mother?" Leo was silent for a few seconds, and then the first words came out like a confession. "I'm afraid." The doctor didn't press him with afraid of what. She just paused, giving him space to continue. Leo exhaled. "I'm afraid she'll get sick. Afraid she'll cry. Afraid people will say I'm a bad son." "From the time you were a child," Dr. Evans asked, "what happened when you disagreed with your mother?" Leo gave a bitter, humorless smile, his eyes cast down. She would go silent. Then she would cry. Then she would stop eating. Once, she clutched her chest and said, "I might as well die and get it over with." It terrified me. Hearing that, a knot formed in my chest. Not out of pity, but out of a sudden, chilling understanding. In Leo's mind, disobedience had been equated with matricide. It was a deeply toxic psychological trap. Dr. Evans leaned forward, her voice still gentle, but sharp. "Do you see that as a form of emotional control? Your mother uses her health and her tears to make you comply. It makes you feel like you have a choice, but in reality, you're always forced to choose in one direction." Leo looked startled, his eyes welling up. "But she's not a bad person. She's just worried." Dr. Evans nodded. "I'm sure your mother's love is real. But even love, when it's distorted, can suffocate someone. The question is, do you want to continue living with that fear for the rest of your life?" Leo clenched his hands together so tightly his knuckles turned white. I didn't intervene. This was a path he had to walk alone. You can warn someone about a shadow, but only they can decide to step out of it. Dr. Evans turned to me. "Clara, what is it that you cannot accept?" I was direct, not rehashing the entire story, but getting to the core of it. "I cannot accept being controlled under the guise of planning for the future. And I cannot accept his silence when my parents' dignity is being attacked." Dr. Evans nodded. "You're asking for a boundary." "Yes," I replied. "A boundary, so we can have mutual respect." She turned back to Leo. "You heard what she said. How does that make you feel?" Leo's voice was hoarse. "It makes me feel like a coward." I knew that statement wasn't to win me over. It was a blow he had just dealt himself. Dr. Evans didn't let him wallow in self-pity. "It's not cowardice. It's conditioned fear. But an adult can unlearn that conditioning. You can love your mother. You can be a good son. But you don't have to let her control your life. Being a good son does not mean unconditional obedience." Leo looked up, his eyes wet. "What do I do?" Dr. Evans gave him a concrete exercise. 3 steps. 1. Recognize when his mother is using illness, tears, or the bad son label to pressure him. 2. Respond with short, respectful, but firm statements. 3. If she continues, end the conversation or leave the situation. "That's not disrespect," she said. "That's a boundary." She looked directly at Leo. "Let's try one now. Imagine your mother is demanding you make Clara hand over her salary." Leo's lips trembled. Then he spoke, very slowly. "Mom, I know you're worried, but our finances are something we will manage ourselves. If you can't respect that, then I'm going to have to end this conversation for now." After he said it, he took a deep breath, as if he'd just run a marathon. I didn't praise him. I just looked at him. For the first time in days, I saw a flicker of self-determination in his eyes. It was small, but it was real. The session ended after about an hour. As we stood in the hallway, Leo said quietly, "I feel like someone just gave a name to something I've felt my whole life." I replied, "Once you can name it, you can deal with it." Leo nodded, looking down at his shoes. "I'm going to try. Not to make my mom happy, but so I don't lose myself. And so I don't make you lose yourself." Hearing that, my heart wasn't entirely convinced, but I knew that, at the very least, something had changed today. Leo was no longer asking me to yield. He was starting to look at his own fear. And sometimes, just being willing to look is enough to loosen the rope a little. In the 3 days following the counseling session, I went to work as usual, but my mind felt a little lighter. Not because everything was resolved, but because at least Leo was willing to face his own fears. He no longer sent texts begging me to just give in. Instead, his messages were short but carried more weight. Finished work. Going to book the next therapy session. I'm going to talk to my mom, but I need to practice what I'm going to say first. I read them without getting my hopes up. I just noted the progress. It's one thing to talk the talk. It's another to walk the walk. That evening, I had just gotten out of the shower when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The opening line made me freeze. Clara, my name is Sharon Davis. I used to work with Leo's mother. I heard about what happened with you, and my heart goes out to you. There is something I think you need to know. If you don't, I'm afraid you'll face a lot of pain later on. Can you meet me for a little while? I read it again and again. My mind flashed back to Eleanor's angry phone call and Aunt Carol's syrupy manipulation. It seemed everyone from Leo's family wanted a private meeting with me. But this message was different. It didn't preach submission. It said you need to know. And the line, you'll face a lot of pain later on, didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a warning. I didn't reply immediately. I went to the living room and told my parents. Someone who says she's a former colleague of Mrs. Vance wants to meet me. My mother was instantly anxious. Is she going to pressure you to apologize? My father looked at me for a moment and then said, meet her in a public place during the day. If anything feels wrong, call me. I nodded. I decided to go, not out of curiosity, but because I needed to understand what I was up against. Some battles are lost not because you are weak, but because you don't know what cards your opponent is hiding. We agreed to meet at a tea shop by the Charles River. It was a Wednesday afternoon, around 4:30. The wind was blowing across the water, turning the surface a silvery gray. The trees along the bank rustled like whispers. The shop wasn't fancy, but it was clean, smelling of dried herbs and old wood. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in the corner, my back to the wall, with a clear view of the entrance. It was a habit from my job, and a new habit from someone who had just learned a hard lesson about boundaries. Sharon Davis arrived on time. She was in her early 50s, with short, neat hair, dressed in neutral colors and flat shoes. She looked at me, her eyes filled not with scrutiny, but with a kind of sympathy. She sat down and got right to the point. You're Clara, right? I'm sorry to bother you, but I felt if I didn't say something, I couldn't live with myself. I replied politely, hello, Miss Davis. Please, go ahead. She sighed, looked out at the river for a moment, then turned back to me. Do you know how many siblings Leo has? I was a little taken aback. I thought I knew, just Leo and Ethan. I answered, I was only told he has a younger brother, Ethan. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. That's what you were told. But the truth is, Leo has an older sister. My heart pounded. An older sister? I repeated the words, as if I had misheard. She spoke slowly. Her name was Lily. She's about 5 years older than Leo. Anyone who worked with Eleanor back then knew about her. She had a beautiful, brilliant daughter. But then, Lily just disappeared, as if she never existed. A chill ran down my spine. She wasn't telling the story in a dramatic way. She spoke with the calm, factual tone of a witness, which made it all the more terrifying. Eleanor was always strict, so strict that her children had to breathe on her schedule. When Lily was 19, she fell in love with a kind, poor university student. When Eleanor found out, she caused a massive scene. She went to Lily's college and said things that were so humiliating, the girl couldn't show her face. Then she brought her home and locked her in her room, forbade her from going out, from seeing anyone. She called it discipline, but it was a prison. I gripped my purse, my mind flashing to the image of Leo, head bowed, at the restaurant. A thin but direct line connected that passed to this present. Sharon Davis took a sip of tea, her voice dropping. Lily couldn't take it. One night, she ran away. Headed west, to California, I heard. Changed her name, cut off all contact. Eleanor went ballistic. She burned all of Lily's photos and forbade anyone from ever mentioning her name. If anyone slipped up and said it, she would fly into a rage. In her mind, that child no longer existed. My voice was hoarse. Did Mr. Vance know? She gave a sad smile. Of course he knew. But he's weak. He's afraid of his wife. His whole life. All he's wanted is peace. But that kind of peace is built on the suffering of his own children. I was silent. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way I didn't want them to. A mother who had been abandoned by her daughter would cling to her son like a life raft. And the son who grew up on that life raft would never learn to breathe on his own. She looked directly at me and said the most important thing. Clara, listen to me. What Eleanor wants isn't your money. She wants control. She's terrified of losing another child, so she binds Leo with her health, with his sense of duty, with her reputation. If you marry into that family, you will be pulled into that vortex of control. If Leo doesn't break free himself, it doesn't matter how strong you are. You will be exhausted. I heard the word exhausted, and I knew she didn't mean physically tired. She meant soul tired. I asked, my voice steady now, why are you telling me this? She shook her head. I don't want anything. I just don't want you to be caught by surprise. I saw what happened to Lily. I don't want to see another young woman's spirit crushed by that twisted idea of family standards. I bowed my head. Thank you, Miss Davis. As she stood up to leave, she added one last thing, like a final, sharp needle. If Leo ever finds out about Lily in some other way, that family is going to have a massive explosion. Be prepared. After she left, I remained seated. The wind from the river blew through a crack in the window, chilling me to the bone. I watched the surface of my tea tremble and suddenly understood an old saying in a new way. A secret, buried for years, when it finally ignites, burns hotter than any new fire. I picked up my phone and opened my chat with Leo. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Asterisk. Tell him now. Or wait. Asterisk. If I told him now, I was afraid he would collapse. If I waited, I was afraid he would find out in a more violent way. I remembered my father's words. Asterisk. Don't let others lead you by the nose asterisk. But this time, if I made the wrong choice, it wasn't just me who would be led. Leo could be thrown into the heart of a hurricane. In the end, I sent a short message, enough to open the door without kicking it down. Leo, if you're free tonight, can we meet for a bit? There's something important about your family that I need to tell you. I want to tell you when you're in a calm space. I turned off my screen and looked out at the river. The water was still calm, but I knew there were currents below. And I knew that, as of this afternoon, my story with Leo was no longer about a future fund. It was about an old wound, covered in ash, that was about to burst into flames. That evening, I waited for Leo's reply. I didn't call him repeatedly or press him for a time. Someone who has just touched upon a family's deepest secret often needs a moment to breathe or to break. I just sat at my desk, my laptop open, but my eyes unfocused. Outside, the traffic thinned, and the early winter wind howled through the window frames. Around 10 p.m., a short text from Leo came through. I'm at my parents' house. Something's happened. I'll call you later. Then, silence. My heart dropped. I knew immediately that what Sharon Davis had warned me about was no longer a potential threat. It was a reality. Just before 11, my phone rang. It was Leo. His voice was completely different. Not the hoarse, pleading tone from before, but the strained voice of someone trying desperately to stay on their feet. Clara, did you know my family has a sister? I paused for 2 seconds, then answered very slowly. Did you just find out? A dry, hollow laugh came through the phone, a laugh that sounded like a sob. I just found a box, in a locked drawer in my mother's closet. I didn't ask what was in it. I asked the only thing that mattered. Are you okay? No, he breathed. I'm shaking. But I have to talk to my mom. Right now. I can't stand it anymore. I only had time to say, be calm. If she escalates, remember what the doctor said. State your boundary and end the conversation. Leo's voice was a whisper. I'll try. But this time, I don't want to back down. I want the truth. The call ended. I sat in the dark. I knew that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again just by pretending you never saw what was inside. Later, when Leo recounted the events of that night, I could finally piece together the scene at his parents' house. He had gone over because his mother called, her voice a mix of sweetness and urgency. Leo, come home. I need to talk to you. He had been practicing his boundaries, so he went with the intention of being clear and direct. But as soon as he walked in, he saw a blood pressure monitor and a bag of prescription pills sitting on the coffee table, placed there like a prop to remind him that his mother was frail. Before he could speak, Eleanor sighed dramatically. Look what you've done to me, son. All this stress. Leo didn't argue. He went to the kitchen to get her a glass of water. That's when he noticed that a high cabinet door wasn't fully closed. He reached up to shut it, and his fingers brushed against a small key, tied with a red ribbon. It didn't look like a key for a kitchen cabinet. It looked like a key for a lockbox. He took it down, intending to ask his mother about it. But just then, Eleanor walked in. The moment she saw the key in his hand, her face changed. She lunged forward and snatched it from him, her voice sharp. "Who told you you could touch my things?" Leo was stunned. "What are you hiding that's making you so scared?" "Nothing," she snapped. "It's nothing. Don't ask." It was that "don't ask" that ignited his suspicion. He didn't try to get the key back, but for the first time, he looked at his mother without flinching. "Mom, I'm asking you seriously. Do we have a sister?" Eleanor froze for a beat. Then a strange, thin, cold smile spread across her face. "Who told you that?" "No one had to tell me," Leo said. "I can see it in your eyes. The way you're avoiding the question tells me everything." Eleanor slammed her hand on the counter. "No. This family has only you and Ethan." Just then, the front door opened, and Ethan walked in. He must have been working late. His clothes still smelled of the city. Seeing the tense atmosphere, he paused at the doorway, looking from his brother to his mother, not speaking. But when he saw the red ribbon key in his mother's hand, his expression darkened, like someone who had just confirmed a long-held rumor. Leo turned to him. "Ethan, do you know anything?" Ethan pressed his lips together, his voice low. "I've heard whispers from outsiders, but Mom forbade us from ever talking about it." Eleanor screamed. "You're taking a side too? Are you two trying to kill me?" Ethan didn't raise his voice. He just said one thing, so cold and quiet it was chilling. "The more you forbid it, Mom, the more the wound festers." That was the match to the gasoline. Eleanor rushed at him, her eyes wild. "How dare you speak to your mother like that?" Ethan didn't back down, but he didn't shout either. "I'm speaking the truth. Leo has a right to know." Leo stepped between them, his voice trembling but clear. "Mom, open the box. I want to see." Eleanor clutched a small metal box to her chest, shaking her head frantically. "There's nothing to see. That girl is dead to me. Asterisk dead to me, asterisk." It was a smooth, practiced denial. But for Leo, it wasn't an answer, it was proof. He stepped forward, not trying to grab the box, but placing his hand on the lid, looking directly at her. "If she's dead to you, why do you keep this locked away? What are you hiding?" Eleanor's voice broke as she screamed. "Because I was ashamed. I gave birth to her. I raised her. And she ran off with some boy. She humiliated me in front of my colleagues, my family." For the first time in his life, Leo's voice exploded. "She ran away because you humiliated her. You imprisoned her. You ruined her life." Mr. Vance ran out from his room, his face pale. "Please, please, keep your voices down." Eleanor spun on her husband, hissing. "Are you defending them too? You've been silent your whole life, so just stay silent." Mr. Vance froze as if he'd been slapped, then retreated, his shoulders slumping. Leo watched the scene, his eyes bloodshot. He said something that, even when he retold it to me, sent a shiver down my spine. "You ruined Lily's life, and now you're trying to ruin mine." Eleanor threw the box on the floor. The lid popped open, and its contents scattered. An old, yellowed birth certificate, a few faded photographs, a child's barrette, the kinds of things people only keep when there's a part of their heart they can't bear to touch. Leo bent down and picked up a photo. In it, a young woman was smiling brightly. Her eyes were startlingly similar to Leo's. He held the photo, his hand shaking violently. Eleanor lunged forward, snatched it from him, and ripped it in half, right in front of his eyes. "Don't ever mention her again. She does not exist." In that moment, it was as if the last thread holding Leo together snapped. He stood up straight, his voice eerily calm. "Fine. If the truth in this house can be torn up like paper, then I don't need to be here anymore." He walked to his room, grabbed a backpack, and threw in a few changes of clothes. Mr. Vance stammered. "Son, where are you going?" Without turning around, Leo said, "I'm going to learn how to be a man." Eleanor shrieked, a mix of crying and screaming. "If you walk out that door, you're a bad son. If you leave, you no longer have a mother." Ethan stood in the living room, his face pale, but he spoke just loud enough for his brother to hear. "Go, Leo. Go, so you can breathe. I'll stay here. I can handle it." Leo slung the backpack over his shoulder, walked out and closed the door behind him. The click of the latch wasn't loud, but it sounded like the closing of a chapter on his old life. Hearing him recount this, I was speechless for a few seconds. My chest ached with a mix of pain and clarity. Pain. Because Leo had been bound for so long. Clarity, because I understood that from this point forward, this was no longer a negotiation about money. It was about escaping a trap, and that trap was tied with blood, reputation, and fear. I asked quietly, "Where are you now?" "At my best friend's place," he said. "I'm standing on his balcony. I can't breathe." I grabbed my coat and keys, telling my parents only, "I have to go out for a bit." My father looked at me, didn't ask questions, just nodded. "Be careful." The night air was colder than I expected, but it was nothing compared to the cold realization that some families would rather tear up a photograph than face the truth. And some men have to walk out into the night before they can begin to figure out who they are. I arrived at Leo's friend's apartment building, close to midnight. Boston was quieter now, the traffic sparse. The wind rustled through the trees, making the dry leaves skitter across the pavement with a sound like a long, weary sigh. I stood at the entrance and looked up at the fifth-floor balcony. A lone figure was leaning against the railing, his shoulders looking thinner than when I'd last seen him at the coffee shop. I knew it was Leo. His friend let me in, his expression apologetic. "He's been out there ever since he got here. Hasn't said a word." I nodded, not pressing for details. After a personal earthquake, questions only create more aftershocks. I walked into the living room. The warm, yellow light cast a soft glow on the floor. It was so quiet I could hear the ticking of a clock. The balcony door was slightly ajar, letting in a draft of night air. I walked straight out. Leo turned when he heard the door slide. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot, not from crying, but from being forced to stay awake for too long. He gave a weak, humorless smile. "You actually came. You sent me the address." "So I came," I said simply. He looked down, his voice sounding like he wanted to apologize, but didn't know where to start. "I've caused you so much trouble." I walked over and stood beside him, not speaking right away. I just looked down at the dark courtyard below. After a long moment, a sound finally broke from him, a choked, masculine sob, the kind that's fought against, swallowed down, and then bursts forth anyway. He covered his face with his hands. I placed my hand on his shoulder, not patting it like you would a child, but just holding it steady, like an anchor. "I feel like everything I believed in just collapsed," he said, his words broken. I didn't ask him to recount the story. I asked about the present. "What are you most afraid of right now?" His answer was immediate, reflexive. "My mother. I'm afraid she'll have an attack. Afraid people will say I abandoned her. Afraid of losing everything." I looked at him, my voice low but clear. "You're already losing it. You're losing yourself. And you'll lose me, too, if you keep choosing fear." He flinched as if I'd struck him. He turned to me. "I don't want to lose you." I nodded. "Then you need to understand something. I cannot be a life raft for you to cling to while the rope is still tied around your neck. I can support you, but I cannot live your life for you." Leo leaned back against the wall, his eyes staring into the distance. I always thought being a good son meant I had to obey. Whatever my mom said, I just nodded. I was terrified that if I argued, she'd get sick. I spoke slowly, letting each word land. "Being a good son means taking care of your mother when she needs it. It means doing what's right so the family suffers less. It does not mean turning your partner into a scapegoat for your mother's anger. And it does not mean hiding from adulthood." He was silent. The wind blew harder, ruffling his hair. I could see him shivering, not from the cold, but from the raw exposure of standing on his own for the first time, without his mother's shadow. I took off my cardigan and draped it over his shoulders. He looked at me, surprised. I said, "Put it on. It's cold." A hoarse laugh escaped him. "You're still worried about me." "Worrying is different from yielding," I replied. "I worry because I still care. But if you don't change, even care can wear thin." Leo sank onto a plastic chair on the balcony, his head in his hands. "What do I do, Clara?" "I don't know where to start." I sat down opposite him, close enough for him to feel my presence, but far enough for him to know this was his journey. "You start by choosing a place where you can breathe, at least for a while. Not to run away from your mother, but to practice living like an adult." He looked up. "You mean I should move out?" "You've already moved out," I said, looking him in the eye. "But you need to do it as a decision, not as an escape, and you need to take responsibility for that decision." Leo's friend brought out 2 glasses of water. I thanked him. Leo took one, his hand still trembling. He took a sip, then asked as if he were afraid of the answer, "Are you going to leave me?" I didn't give him a comforting, easy answer. I gave him the truth, the boundary. I won't leave someone who is trying to fix things. I will only leave someone who asks me to endure so he doesn't have to stand up. He lowered his head for a long time, then whispered, I understand. I'm so sorry for leaving you alone at the restaurant. I didn't bring up that wound again. Reopening it would only cause more pain for both of us, and he would just retreat back into guilt and avoidance. I just said, an apology is good, but it has to be followed by change. His phone buzzed. A text message lit up the screen. He looked at it, his eyes turning redder. He showed it to me. It was from Ethan. You took a huge step tonight. Don't go back. If Mom makes a scene, I'll handle it. Live your own life, brother. I read it and felt a weight in my chest, but also a warmth. Ethan was a man of few words, but each one was in the right place. I told Leo, your brother understands. Don't let him down. Leo let out a long breath, as if he had just made a monumental decision. Tomorrow, I'm going to find an apartment near my office. I don't want to live in fear anymore. I nodded. Find a small place, clean and safe. Learn to take care of yourself. He looked at me and managed a small, teary smile. I'm a terrible cook. I replied with a touch of humor to lighten the mood. If it's terrible but edible, you'll survive. The real problem is being terrible and still expecting someone else to eat it for you. He let out a real laugh, the first one that wasn't forced. Then he grew serious again. Will you move in with me? I shook my head. Not yet. You need to learn to stand on your own first. I can help you make a plan, but you have to do the work. If I move in, you'll just get used to having someone else carry the load. Leo nodded, a new light in his eyes. I'll keep going to therapy. I'll learn how to say no without feeling guilty. I stood up and looked at him. Good. And remember one thing. Boundaries aren't about defeating your mother. They're about allowing you to live and ensuring that the person you love doesn't get crushed in the process. The night wind was still cold, but my heart no longer felt like it was drifting. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least, on this late-night balcony, Leo was no longer standing alone at the edge of a cliff. More importantly, he was starting to choose how to step back from that cliff, on his own 2 feet. 3 days after that night on the balcony, Leo sent me a photo of his new apartment. It wasn't large, just a small studio, with white walls and a window overlooking a shared courtyard with a bougainvillea vine. In the corner was a single bed, an old wooden desk, and an electric hot plate on a shelf. It looked so basic that I texted back. Looks like a college dorm room, he replied. I feel lighter, like I just took off a coat that was 2 sizes too small. I didn't overdo the praise. I just asked, have you budgeted for rent and utilities? He replied immediately. I made a spreadsheet. I've set aside a fixed amount for savings that I won't touch. I read that and felt a little more at ease. When a person starts using the word spreadsheet, they're beginning to live by logic, not just emotion. I didn't help him move. It wasn't because I was being cold, but because I had been clear. I wouldn't become his new crutch. I just texted, if you need anything, just ask. He sent a thumbs up emoji and added, I'll do it myself. That evening, he video called me. The screen showed a chaotic mess. Open boxes, clothes in piles, a rolled-up duvet. He stood in the middle of the room, his hair disheveled, and gave a weary smile. I don't know where to start. I didn't lecture him. I just spoke like a project manager, assigning tasks. Start with the smallest thing. Hang up your clothes. Take out the trash. Mop the floor. One step at a time. You make it sound so easy, he said. Easy or hard doesn't matter, I replied. What matters is that you do it. He smiled, then hung up to get to work. It was a small act, but for someone used to living under constant direction, it was the first time he was directing himself. In the days that followed, Leo began to experience real life in a very real way. He'd go to work, then stop by the grocery store on the way home, standing in front of the spice aisle like a student facing a strange exam. He texted me, what's the difference between iodized salt and sea salt? I replied simply, they're both salty. Just buy the regular kind. He texted back, every one of your answers is like a final verdict. I smiled to myself. Life teaches you lessons, and sometimes those lessons start with a container of salt. One night, he tried to fry an egg on high heat and burned it to a crisp. He sent me a photo with the caption, looks like the moon after a meteor shower. I didn't laugh at him. I just texted, lower the heat, be patient. He replied, I'm learning to be patient. With the eggs, and with myself. It sounded a bit silly, but it was true. The hardest part wasn't in the kitchen. It was with his phone. On his fourth day, in the new apartment, Eleanor called. I didn't hear it directly, but Leo recounted it to me, as if he needed to confirm he had handled it correctly. He said she called at 8 p.m., her voice a mix of sweet and severe. "Where are you? Did you really abandon your mother?" Leo took a deep breath, remembering the therapist's advice. Short, clear, respectful. He replied, "I've moved out to learn to be independent, Mom. I will still take care of you, but I need to live my own life." Eleanor immediately played her trump card. "My blood pressure is through the roof. Do you want me to die?" Leo said that when he heard those words, his hand started to shake and a lump formed in his throat. But he managed to say, "If you're sick, Mom, you should see a doctor. I'll pay for your medicine. I'll take you to your appointments if you need me to. But you cannot use your health to manipulate me." Just hearing him retell it made me tense. To say that, he had to conquer himself. Eleanor screamed at him, accusing him of being brainwashed by me. She threatened to call all their relatives and disown him. Leo said that for a moment, he wanted to just give in and make it stop. But then he remembered the image of his mother tearing up the photo of his sister, and the feeling of being suffocated his whole life. He ended the conversation with one sentence. "When you've calmed down, Mom, we can talk again. I have to go now." Then, he hung up. After hanging up, he sat in silence for a long time, his heart pounding. He texted me just one line. "I did it." I replied, "Good. Now you know you can do it again." I wasn't being cold. I just didn't want him to become addicted to praise. He needed to become addicted to responsibility. One thing I noticed was that since moving out, Leo no longer used his mother as an excuse to ask me to yield. He didn't call me to rescue him when she caused a scene. He handled it himself, and then told me about it later. That was a huge difference. A grown man isn't someone who isn't afraid. He's someone who is afraid, but stands up anyway. Leo continued with his therapy sessions, booking and attending them on his own. One day, he texted, "Doctor, Evans had me write down all the phrases my mom uses to pressure me, and then write out my responses. I read it and thought, this is homework for adults, but it's necessary. Just like forging steel, you have to hammer it out. A psychological knot can't be untied with a single argument." Meanwhile, the gossip continued. On my way home from work, a neighbor asked, "So where's that Leo fellow? I heard his family called off the engagement." I just smiled. That's a private matter. I didn't explain. Explaining would just create more drama. My father had taught me, never explain yourself to people who aren't living your life. I remembered that every time I felt the urge to justify myself. By the second week, Leo started talking more about his sister, Lily, not out of simple curiosity, but as if he were haunted by her absence. He texted, "I keep thinking, if Lily had just one person on her side back then, maybe she wouldn't have had to run away." I read it and my heart sank. I knew he was hurting for his sister, but he was also hurting for himself, because he saw how his own story could have ended, just with me in her place. One evening, he called me, his voice serious. "Clara, I want to find Lily." I didn't ask why. I knew. Finding her was about restoring a piece of the truth, and about cutting the cord of silence that had bound his family for so long. I just asked, "Do you have any leads?" He said, "I remember Sharon Davis said she used to work with my mom. I want to ask her more. And I want to find some of my mom's old colleagues. Maybe they know where Lily went." I told him, "Do it. But don't just charge ahead and burn out. Take it one step at a time. Make a plan." He gave a small laugh. "You and your plans." "Yes," I replied. "Because your life has lacked a plan for so long. Someone else has been writing the script for you." He was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I don't want anyone else writing it anymore." That night, I stayed up late. I pictured his small apartment, the warm yellow light, a man learning how to wash dishes, how to end a phone call, and how to find the sister who had been ripped out of his family's history. I didn't dare to believe in a fairy tale ending, but I could see that the river of his life had changed course. Because once a person learns to be independent with a bowl of rice, they can eventually learn to be independent in the biggest matters of life. And for me, that was the only future fund that truly mattered. Not whose hands held the money, but what kind of courage was in the heart of the person I chose to walk with. Leo approached the search for his sister exactly as he'd promised, one step at a time. He wasn't dramatic or impulsive, and he didn't call me for constant reassurance. He gathered his own leads first, then asked for my input only on specific, necessary points. His first lead was Sharon Davis. Leo called her, introduced himself, and asked if they could meet. She suggested the same tea shop by the river. I didn't go with him. I just advised. Ask direct questions, but stay calm. Don't turn this into an interrogation. He just texted back, I understand. That afternoon, he gave me the summary. Miss Davis didn't know Lily's exact address, but she remembered a crucial detail. Back then, Lily had a best friend in college who later went into the travel industry and had helped Lily book her ticket to California. Miss Davis still had an old phone number for this friend, though they hadn't spoken in years. Leo took the number and started trying. The first call went to voicemail. On the second call, a woman answered. When she heard Eleanor Vance's name, she went completely silent. Leo had to be very clear. I'm not calling to cause trouble. I'm Lily's younger brother. I just want my sister to know that I never forgot her. That seemed to soften her. The woman told him to send her a message, and she would forward it. Late that night, Leo sent me a screenshot of the message he had drafted. It was simple and unadorned. Lily, this is Leo. If you're still angry, I understand, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I grew up not even knowing you existed. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking for the chance to call you my sister. I read it and felt a lump in my throat. Some apologies arrive late, but late is better than never. 2 days later, he got a response. Not a text, but a long email forwarded from Lily's old friend. Leo received it while he was at the office. He texted me, I'm leaving work early. I replied, go home, read it somewhere you feel safe. That evening, he asked me to come to his apartment. When I arrived, he was sitting on the floor, his back against the bed, his laptop open. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. It was the redness of someone who has just witnessed a piece of a lost life. She replied, he said. He didn't read it out loud. He just turned the laptop towards me, while he read along with his own eyes, slowly, line by line. Lily wrote that she had been living in Los Angeles for over a decade. She was married and had a young daughter. She didn't complain, she just stated facts. When she first ran away, she thought it would be easier to die out there than to live in a house where every breath required permission. She said she didn't blame her younger brother, because he was just a child then, also trapped. But she did resent the way adults could use the excuse of family honor to crush a young person's spirit. She ended the letter with a simple sentence that chilled me to the bone. I don't need anyone to apologize on our mother's behalf. I just need you not to repeat her mistakes. When he finished reading, Leo closed the laptop and bowed his head for a long time. He didn't sob. He just exhaled, like a man who has finally set down a heavy sack he's been carrying his whole life. After a moment, he said, his voice hoarse, I always thought she disappeared because she did something wrong. It turns out, she disappeared so she could live. I sat down next to him, not hugging him, not patting his back. I just said, now that you know, you have the right to choose how you want to live. Leo looked at me, a little light returning to his eyes. I want to see her, but I won't force it. I'm going to go to California, if she'll let me. I nodded. Ask her first. Don't surprise her. I will, he said. I'll respect her wishes. That night, he said something that surprised me. I have to talk to my mother. Are you sure? I asked. He gave a bitter smile. If I don't, I'll always be afraid. And if I'm afraid, you'll be the one who suffers. I don't want Lily's story of escaping to be followed by your story of being trapped. He didn't mention money. He didn't mention marriage. He mentioned not letting me become the next victim. Hearing that, I felt a straight, solid line being drawn in my heart. The next morning, Leo messaged Ethan. Ethan's reply was short. If you're going to do this, see it through. Don't go home alone. Leo told me, Ethan will be there. I didn't have to ask whose side Ethan was on. I had known for a long time that he was on the side of what was right. That evening, when Leo went to his parents' house, I didn't go with him. I stayed home, but I kept my phone close. Not to intervene, but to be there if he needed an anchor. Around 10 p.m., he called. His voice was tired but steady. I told her. He said that this time, he didn't plead for her understanding. He didn't promise to obey. He just said, Mom, I know about Lily. I'm going to contact her, and I will not allow you to insult Clara or her family ever again. My money and my life are my own to manage. Eleanor exploded, as expected. But unlike every other time, Leo didn't get into a long argument. He just repeated one sentence. I love you, Mom, but I will not accept being controlled. Then, when she started to use her health and her tears, he stood up and left. Ethan didn't say much. He just stood by his brother's side at the right moments. Before he left, Leo said Ethan looked at their mother and said, "You tie your children up with ropes and then complain when they can't breathe." Eleanor was momentarily silenced, then started screaming again. But that brief silence, for Leo, was proof that his mother knew exactly what she was doing. After he finished telling me, he asked, "Do you think I was cruel?" "No," I replied. "Cruelty is dragging someone down with you and calling it love. You are just taking your life back into your own hands." After a pause, he said, "I want us to try living together, based on the commitment we discussed. 6 months. No rushing to the altar. No big announcements." I looked at him. "I agree to try. If you can maintain your boundaries like you did today. Not just once, but consistently." He nodded. "I understand. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm going to show you." I left his apartment and walked down the stairs, the night wind blowing through the narrow hallway. I thought to myself, some letters arrive late, but they arrive at exactly the right time. The right time for a man to stop being afraid of a shadow in his own home. And the right time for a woman like me to know that I wasn't entering a marriage based on submission, but on a clear agreement of respect, boundaries, and responsibility. After the night Leo confronted his mother, I didn't ask him for a play-by-play of her reactions anymore. I just observed the things that could be measured by actions, how he maintained his new life, how he handled her phone calls, and how he placed me and my family in a position of respect. 3 days later, he texted me, "I'm going to my parents' house again tonight. This time, I'm going to be even clearer. And I'm going to do one specific thing. Defend your family's honor." I read the text and replied simply, "I don't need you to win any battles. I just need you to stand in the right place." He replied with one word, "Okay." Leo went with Ethan, not to gang up on their mother, but to avoid being cornered and pulled back into the cycle of tears and guilt. This time, he was direct, his words sharp and clear, as if each one was underlined. "Mom, I love you, but you will not insult Clara or her parents. You will not interfere with my finances. And whether I get married or not is my decision." Mr. Vance sat there, his hands trembling. But unlike every other time, he didn't retreat to his room. He just sighed and said something I never thought I'd hear. "Eleanor, that's enough. The boy is a grown man." Eleanor immediately flew into a rage, threatening to disown them, to call all the relatives, to expose them to the whole neighborhood. Ethan didn't argue. He just took out his phone and played a short audio recording. It was Eleanor's voice from the day she had called my parents, calling them poor, calling me disrespectful. Her voice was perfectly clear, chillingly calm. Ethan placed the phone on the table, looked at his mother, and said slowly, "If you want to call the relatives, Mom, I'll send this to the family group chat first. Let's see who's really embarrassing whom." The room fell completely silent. Mr. Vance looked at his wife, his eyes a mixture of sadness and exhaustion. Eleanor's face went white, as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. It's true what they say. What goes around, comes around. The words she thought were just weapons to intimidate others had come back to haunt her. She still tried to fight back. "How dare you?" Leo cut her off, his voice firm but not raised. "I don't dare to be disrespectful. I just dare to speak the truth. If you want me to be around, you will learn to show respect." He stood up and added one final, steely sentence. "From now on, I will visit you on a schedule. If you need to go to the doctor, I will take you. But if you ever bring up Clara's name in a negative way, I will turn around and leave immediately." When Leo walked out of that house, he was no longer shaking. The price Eleanor paid wasn't a fine or an accident. It was the loss of what she considered her most powerful weapon, the ability to control her sons with fear and public opinion. When she lost that, she finally had to learn that holding on too tightly just makes things slip through your fingers. A week later, Leo formally asked my parents if he could treat them to a meal. Not a dinner of apology, but a reintroduction as a different man. He insisted on cooking himself at the apartment we planned to share, so my parents could see his real life, not a performance at a restaurant. That afternoon, I came home early to go grocery shopping with him. He picked out a chicken, fresh vegetables, some shrimp and mushrooms, and then stood in the spice aisle, muttering to himself like he was memorizing lines. I found it amusing but didn't tease him too much. I just said, "Don't try to be a gourmet chef. Just make something my parents will enjoy." He nodded, his face as serious as if he were heading into a board meeting. My parents arrived with a small basket of fruit from a local farm. Leo stood up to greet them, addressing them properly as Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. He took the basket and poured them drinks himself. The meal wasn't perfect, the soup was a bit bland. The chicken was clumsily carved, but what mattered was that he didn't push the work onto me or sit back and wait to be served. After dinner, he cleared the table, washed the dishes, and wiped down the kitchen. My father watched him for a while, then said just one thing. The fact that you're doing this shows you're willing to change. Leo stood up straight and bowed his head slightly. I apologize for the hurt I caused you both. I promise that from now on, if anyone tries to hurt Clara, I will be the one to stand in front of her. My mother was quiet, her eyes glistening. I knew she wouldn't trust him completely overnight, but she had seen something rare, a man who could admit his mistakes without making excuses. Just before Christmas, a package arrived from Los Angeles. The sender was Lily. Leo's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were 2 pairs of hand-knitted gloves and a dark gray wool, one for him, and one for me. There was no long letter, just a small card. Wishing you both warm hands and warm hearts. Leo clutched the box to his chest, a single tear rolling down his cheek. This time, it wasn't a tear of brokenness, but a tear of healing. On New Year's Eve, Boston was colder than usual. Leo and I walked around the harbor. The city was lit up, crowded with people laughing and talking. The smell of roasted chestnuts and hot cider hung in the air. At the exact moment the fireworks began to explode over the water, Leo stopped and turned to me. He didn't get down on one knee. He just stood straight and looked at me with an entirely new kind of gaze, the gaze of a man who knows what he is choosing. Clara, he began, I can't promise you a life without storms, but I can promise that from now on, I will never let anyone use duty or illness or reputation to make you bow your head. I will be a real husband. I will be the one who shields you from the storm, not the one who pushes you into it. He held out a simple, delicate ring. Will you agree to walk with me in the way we've planned? I looked at the fireworks, and then I looked at him. I nodded, not because I had won, but because I had seen him build a boundary with his own 2 hands. In life, a successful partnership isn't about one person yielding for the sake of peace. It's about 2 people standing together on the side of what's right when the world tries to turn it upside down. Asterisk. If you found this story thought-provoking, please leave a like for the channel. If you have any feedback or experiences you'd like to share, please leave a comment below for everyone to learn from. Thank you for listening to the very end. We wish you health and serenity. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next story on Serenity in the Golden Years. Asterisk.